dusty snow whispers low. Where did all the people go? Nowhere to run, nowhere to grow. Sun, hear that sound all around. Dusty snow whispers low.
I no longer remember exactly what day it is since the sky fell. Maybe the 8th year, or the 9th. I stopped counting, then started again, then forgot. Because numbers no longer mean anything in a world where the sun is nothing more than a faint smear of light behind a sky thick as solid concrete. I live alone in an old wooden cabin, deep within the white wasteland, once marked on old maps as Nor Hollow Basin, a valley between two collapsed mountain ranges. Once, there were pine forests here, rivers, birds. Now there is only ice and wind. The cabin was built from scavenged planks taken from abandoned camps. The floor creaks with every step, and smoke slits through the cracks in the wood like a soul escaping its body. I'm writing these lines with a graphite stick on animal hide, one of the rare things I found in a snow-buried warehouse. Maybe no one will ever read it, but humans have always had the habit of recording something. Even if only to prove they once existed. They said the earth once burned, oceans boiled like vast kettles. Then, suddenly everything collapsed. When the ocean currents stopped, the cold air from the poles spilled down and devoured everything. At first, I thought it was just a long winter. But as the second year passed, the snow never melted. None of us were prepared for that. Cities died as fast as a bleeding body. Power cut, water froze, food rotted. People looted each other, lit foolish bonfires in the squares, and suffocated in coal smoke. I left the city in the third winter, when the roads had vanished beneath snow higher than rooftops. I carried a sled, a few small solar panels, a knife, and a survival manual I'd once written for my students. I used to be an energy engineer, perhaps the only profession that still made a little sense at the end of the world. The first day I arrived in Nor Hollow Basin, I thought I'd stay only a few weeks. But then the storms came, endless and merciless. The wind cut through every layer of clothing. The world outside turned white, and time stopped meaning anything. Each day became the same ritual. Wake up, light the stove, melt snow for water, check traps, write a few lines, sleep. I learned to save matches by using the sun's reflection on a piece of broken glass to ignite the tinder. I learned that frozen meat could last forever, but the loneliness inside a man could rot faster than any food. Sometimes I'd talk aloud, just to hear a voice, even if it was my own. The echo would answer back, soft and hollow. I called it the ghost of the wind. In the first year alone, I lost track of how many times I thought I would die. Once from hunger, once from falling through ice, and many times from simply not wanting to wake up again. But every time I thought of stopping, I would imagine the faces of those who never made it, and something in me refused to give the cold the last word. I built a small greenhouse beside the cabin, using glass panels from an old watchtower. Inside, I grew moss, mushrooms, and a few stubborn plants that didn't seem to care that the world had ended. They grew slow, pale, fragile, but alive. Sometimes when I looked at them, I thought maybe survival wasn't about strength, but about endurance, the silent kind that refuses to die quietly. One night, the wind stopped. The silence was so thick I could hear my own pulse. I went outside and saw the sky faintly glowing, not the sun but the aurora, stretching like a scar across the heavens. For a moment, I felt warmth not on my skin, but somewhere deeper, as if the earth was whispering that it wasn't done yet. That night, I wrote, "If someone ever finds this place, know that I tried. I tried to remember how to live, even when living meant nothing." And I kept writing, because when there's no one left to talk to, writing becomes the last form of breathing. I began preparing to leave Norhollow Basin on the morning of day 2436, since the collapse. No one told me to go. There was no reason to move, except for a broken voice that had whispered through the old radio 2 nights before. In the apocalypse, sometimes all it takes to awaken a buried instinct is the sound of another human. I spent 3 days gathering everything I needed. The most important thing wasn't food or water. It was resolve, the only thing that couldn't fit in a backpack. I had an old leather pack, patched and torn. Inside, I organized carefully 3 packets of dried rations, a small jar of salt, 2 protein bars I'd made from dried meat and fish fat, a fire starter, knife, rope, thermal blanket, and my most precious belongings, a mini solar panel, the radio, a notebook, a compass, and a map whose lines had almost vanished. Each item had a story. The compass, I found it on a soldier's frozen body. Its needle trembled, like it was afraid, but it still pointed true. The knife, forged from a shard of an old highway sign, cold but trustworthy. Before leaving, I stood for a long time at the cabin door. On the wall, I carved a line with my blade. "If anyone comes after me, know that I once lived here." Then I turned my back and never looked again. The world outside looked like an ocean turned solid. The plains stretched endlessly, streaked with ridges of blue ice and shards of stone that rose like the teeth of a buried beast. I walked north, toward what old maps called the Glacier Range. There were no tracks, no birds, not even the sound of my breath seemed real anymore. Traveling through the cold teaches you harsh truths. Never move at night. The temperature drops faster than thought. Walk 2 hours, rest 15 minutes to keep the body's rhythm. And always keep your feet dry. Wet boots will kill you before hunger does. I planted wooden stakes every 500 steps, tying small strips of cloth to them. My way back, if I ever needed one. After 10 markers, I stopped, drank a mouthful of water, so cold it hurt, and stared at the sky, gray and heavy, with the sun nothing more than a pale wound behind clouds. On the fourth day, the wind quieted. That was when I saw it. A shape half buried in the ice. A snowmobile. Its metal was rusted, half swallowed by frost. I approached carefully. Inside the cabin was a skeleton, still wearing gloves. On the passenger seat lay a map, sealed in a plastic sleeve. A red circle, marked 1 point, with the shaky words, Station 17, Relay Point. My heart pounded. Maybe that was where the voice on the radio had come from. I folded the map and slipped it into my jacket. In the seat pocket, I found a few dry cell batteries, tiny miracles in a dead world. Before leaving, I covered the man's body with snow, then whispered, "Thank you, my friend. I'll carry what's left of hope for both of us." By the seventh day, the sky turned black as ink. A storm was coming. The ground began to shake under the wind's roar. I needed shelter. Far ahead, I spotted a shadow rising from the ice. Maybe an old checkpoint. I crawled there, forced open the metal door, and slipped inside. It was cold, dark, and smelled of rust and dust, but windproof. I lit a small fire and waited. When storms come, the best thing to do is be still. Move too much, and the cold finds you. Sleep in short bursts. A storm can last for days. Outside, the wind screamed like voices calling my name. But every time I opened my eyes, there was only darkness. That's when I learned that storms don't just strip the earth, they strip memory. When it finally passed, I explored the station. A rusted plate read, Outpost 4A, North Energy Line. It had once been part of a wind energy network. In the storage room, I found several frozen hydrogen cells, still holding charge. I connected one to my radio. The speaker hissed. Then, faintly, came a voice. Station 17, still active. North, 270 kilometers, if anyone's left. I jolted upright. The same coordinates that were circled on the map. 270 kilometers north. A distance that could kill me if I wasn't careful. I stayed 2 more days, recharging the batteries, drying clothes, writing in my journal. I noted, don't trust memory. Write down every direction. Keep metal against your body when you sleep. If it's not cold, you're too weak. Every sound in a storm is not someone calling you. Don't go out. The second night, a sound woke me. A long, low howl, not wind. I sat up, knife in hand. It came again, closer. I turned off the light and pressed my ear to the steel door. No footsteps, only breathing. Heavy, human. I didn't open it. I never opened it. At dawn, when I finally dared step outside, I found footprints in the snow, human. They led away from the station and vanished into the white. That was when I understood. I was not the only one alive. Or maybe not the only one wandering. Day 2447. I resumed the journey. Each day, I covered 20 to 25 kilometers, depending on the wind. At night, I dug shallow pits, lit fires from driftwood and old wires, and recorded my voice. Not to send to anyone, but to hear something human. Among the crackle of fire, my voice sounded hoarse. I'm still walking. I still believe someone's north of here. Sometimes faith isn't what keeps you alive. It's simply the reason you keep walking. On the 12th night, Just when exhaustion blurred my thoughts, I saw it, a faint yellow light on the horizon. It flickered rhythmically, like a beacon. I thought I was hallucinating, but it didn't fade. I took out my compass. Yes, north. I fell to my knees, and the tears froze before they reached my chin. In a world made of ice, sometimes a single flicker of light is enough to save a soul. I wrote, Day 2458. I saw the light. Maybe it's Station 17. If I die tomorrow, at least I saw something worth believing in. I left the old shack after 17 days. The last storm had passed 3 nights ago, leaving the ice cracked like shattered glass. The sky was clear again, clearer than it had been in years, though the light was still dim and colorless. I wrapped 2 layers of cloth around my neck, tightened my pack, checked my knife, my spare batteries, and the half box of rations I still had left. Then I started walking north. I once found an old map in a buried supply hut. It mentioned Station 17, Atmospheric Research Dome, about 60 kilometers from where I'd been hiding. A place once used to monitor stratospheric weather before the global grid failed. Maybe, if anything still worked, there would be energy. Or if luck hadn't completely died, people. The first 3 days passed with only the sound of my own breathing. Surviving in the ice is unlike surviving anywhere else. In the snow, everything is white. And when everything is white, there's nothing to guide you but your own memory. I once read that in the snow, even the smallest deviation can make you die a few hundred meters from home without realizing it. I believe it now. To avoid losing my way, I planted small stakes every few hundred steps, each tied with a strip of red cloth. When the wind howls and the snow swirls, they're the only link keeping you from disappearing. Food was running low. I learned how to melt snow faster by sprinkling salt in the pot. It made it liquefy quicker, saving precious fuel. I set up traps for snow rats, but caught only one in 2 nights. It was no bigger than my hand, frozen stiff, but still meat. I roasted it over a metal plate, whispered a quiet thank you, and ate slowly. After years of isolation, you begin talking to everything. The fire, the wind, even your food. Maybe it's how the mind keeps the soul from going silent. On the 5th day, I saw something rising in the distance. A half-buried dome of steel, cracked on one side. Letters faint but legible. Station 17, Atmospheric Research Facility. I'd found it. The main door was jammed shut under a crust of ice. It took me 2 hours of digging and prying with a crowbar before it gave way. Inside was darkness, the smell of iron, oil, and time mixed together. I turned on my flashlight. The beam revealed fallen chairs, old control panels, the dry husk of a bird lying by the wall. I chose a corner as my camp. The facility had 3 levels: basement, technical floor, observation dome. I moved carefully, the air heavy like a tomb. In the basement, I found relics that still worked. 12 solar cells, a few copper coils, and a near-full butane tank, enough to cook and keep warm for weeks. That night, as I drifted near sleep, I heard a sound. Not the wind, metal clanging softly, then silence. I grabbed my knife, turned the flashlight toward the noise. Nothing. When I returned to my spot, there was something on the table that hadn't been there before. A white plastic ID card. It read, Aaron Vaughn, data engineer. Someone had been here, or still was. I didn't sleep much. Morning came with a clear sky. A pale light leaking through the dome's cracks, tinting everything bluish-gray. I climbed up to the top level. There, half buried under frost, was an antenna array and a broken terminal. I spent hours reconnecting wires, cleaning boards, scraping off corrosion. When I attached a charged cell, the screen flickered. A single beep, then another, and a tiny green light blinked on. The sound startled me, like hearing a heartbeat after years of silence. I tuned the radio, static filling the air. Then, amid the static, a voice, distorted, faint, but real. If anyone can hear, head east, Ridgeway Range, there's light. It could have been a reflection, a glitch, or maybe an echo from long ago. But my heart, quiet for so long, began to beat with something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I sat there for hours, playing that fragment again and again, imagining the person behind the voice. The next morning, I decided to stay at Station 17 for a week, recharge what I could, dry my clothes, stock up for the next trip. I wrote everything in my logbook, just as I always had. Not because I feared forgetting, but because I feared no one would remember. Day 204 of the new ice age. Temperature, -38°C. Food, enough for 18 days. Radio signal 94.2. Possible survivors at Ridgeway. I closed the notebook and stared out through the frost-coated window. The earth now looked like an old friend gasping for air. Cold, quiet, exhausted. But if someone was still out there, even one person, I would find them. Not because I needed them, but because I needed to believe there was still a reason for us to exist. I charged my last battery, packed my gear, and marked the next entry. Tomorrow, I leave Station 17. I'm going toward the light. I left Station 17 on the 8th morning. Before going, I climbed back to the top level and shut down every system, one by one. Like closing the doors of a house I knew I'd never return to. Each time I left a place, it became another scar, a memory frozen in the ice. Station 17 would be one of them. I tied the map to my pack strap, slipped the mini antenna into my outer pocket, and adjusted the compass. The direction was east, toward Ridgeway, the place mentioned in the radio signal. I had no idea how far it was, but if the map was right, it would take at least 10 days. I wasn't afraid of the distance. I was only afraid there'd be no one left at the end of it. On the first day, I moved slowly to let my body adapt again. The temperature held at -35°C, but there was sunlight, weak, almost silver. The northern sun doesn't warm. It simply exists, a pale reminder of what light used to mean. The surface of the ice reflected it so sharply that my eyes watered. Sometimes the snow crust cracked under my boots, and the sound, crack, echoed like glass shattering. I learned never to trust smooth ground. The places that look safest are often the first to break. I stopped walking only when the sky turned dark. With no trees to block the wind, I dug a shallow pit beneath a slope, set up the thermal blanket, and lit a small burner inside an old tin can. The flame flickered weakly, throwing an orange light across the icy walls. The shadows danced, soft and slow, For a moment, I thought of old rooms, the yellow glow of city windows, the hum of traffic, all the small noises that once proved life existed. Now, even silence had texture. That night, I heard a howl. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it came again, longer, deeper. A wolf, perhaps. I tightened my grip on the knife. Animals that survive the end of the world are stronger than we ever were. I didn't feed the fire anymore. I just sat still, listening. The sound moved away, fading into the night. It was strange. The loneliness in that cry felt familiar, almost human. On the third day, I found footprints. 3 sets, clear and recent. They weren't mine. My pulse quickened. I followed them through drifts and fissures, across ridges of snow that glistened under the gray sun. They led me to a half-buried outpost made of steel, covered in frost. The door was ajar. Inside, there were metal bunks, a foldable table, and 2 sleeping bags. One was still warm. I froze, unable to move. Someone had been here, maybe still nearby. On the table sat an opened can of food and a damp notebook. I managed to read only fragments. Signal fading. Ridgeway still active. Must leave before the storm. No names, no dates, but the faint smell of smoke still clung to the air. They couldn't have left more than 2 days ago. I took what remained of their food, not much, but enough to matter, and stayed until dusk. Then the storm came. I had no choice but to go back inside. The wind slammed against the roof like a hammer. I crouched near the wall, the burner flickering low, the sound of metal groaning around me. Outside, the world screamed, a chorus of ghosts trying to get in. At one point, I imagined the others had died here, buried under the same kind of storm. It's strange how easily the mind writes eulogies for strangers you never meet. When the storm finally passed, half the roof was gone. I salvaged what I could and left a note behind. If anyone comes after me, I'm heading toward Ridgeway. J. On the 6th day, I fell. A hidden crack opened beneath the snow, and I plunged nearly 2 meters before hitting rock. Pain tore through my leg. My knee had split open. The wound didn't bleed much. The cold froze it quickly. I cleaned it with alcohol, tore my undershirt into strips, and bandaged it tight. Then I waited. The pain was dull, distant, the kind of pain you don't trust, because it means your body's too cold to feel properly. I lay there half the day, staring up through the narrow gap above me. The sky was a deep, unreal blue. Then, slowly, a faint shimmer appeared, a greenish band of light, moving softly across the darkness. The aurora. I hadn't seen it since the world ended. For the first time in years, I laughed. It came out hoarse, dry, but real. Even at the end, the sky still refused to die completely. By the 8th day, the terrain began to change. The ice split into veins of dark water. The temperature rose slightly, maybe -20 degrees Celsius. Far ahead, I thought I saw smoke. It could have been sunlight refracting off ice, or it could have been fire. Either way, I walked faster, limping, driven by something that felt almost like hunger. Every step stabbed my knee, but the thought that someone might still be alive numbed everything else. As night fell, I reached a ridge, and there, across the valley, I saw it. A structure built into the slope, tall antennas, a faint golden light pulsing in its windows. A metal sign, barely legible, Ridgeway Outpost. I couldn't believe my eyes. The antenna was moving, slowly, deliberately. Someone was still maintaining it. I stumbled down the ridge, half running, half falling. The cold bit into my lungs. When I reached the door, I slammed my fist against it. "Is anyone in there?" I shouted. Silence. Then a click. The door opened a crack. A woman's voice, rough, tired, and real. "Who are you?" I froze. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't the wind. "I heard the radio," I stammered. "I came from Station 17. The door opened wider. Warm yellow light spilled out, soft and foreign. In its glow stood a woman, thin, short hair, wrapped in a thick coat, face marked by years of cold, but eyes alive. She studied me for a long time, then said quietly, "Welcome to Ridgeway. You're late." I sat by their fire that night. She told me her name, Erin Vaughn, the same name I'd found on that ID card at Station 17. When I handed it to her, she stared for a long moment. Finally, she said, "I worked there, left before the first great storm. I thought everyone there was gone." Her voice shook, but her gaze didn't. In this world, anyone who can still tremble for memory is still human. Erin showed me around the outpost. It was small, 3 rooms, powered by worn solar panels and a gas generator. She wasn't alone. There was an old man named Marcus and a young boy, Theo. They kept the radio alive, logging data, recording every signal they caught. They called it Project Climate Recovery, though what they really had left were just numbers on fading paper. But the act itself, counting, measuring, caring, felt holy. Even when the world stops listening, some people keep whispering back to it. Dinner was a thin soup made from algae and melted snow. It wasn't good, but it was hot, and it tasted like something that still belonged to life. Marcus smiled, his teeth chipped. "Doesn't need to be good, son. Just needs to be warm." We ate in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This silence breathed. It carried the sound of spoons clinking, the rustle of clothes, the faint hum of the generator. Proof that life, however small, still persisted. That night, I realized survival had never been about food or fire. It was about remembering how to be human. I stayed at Ridgeway for 15 days, long enough to forget the smell of loneliness, long enough to remember what it felt like to have someone sitting beside you, eating, speaking, even staying silent. Ridgeway was small. Only 3 rooms still stood intact. They gave me a cot near an old window where light still managed to slip through every morning, faint sunlight, like something half-remembered. The woman's name was Erin Vaughn. I recognized it instantly. The same name printed on the ID card I had found back at Station 17. When I handed it to her, she looked at it for a long time before whispering, "I worked there once. Left before the first great storm. I thought everyone was buried." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes didn't. In this world, anyone who can still tremble for a memory is still alive in spirit. Erin showed me around the outpost. The electricity came from a cluster of broken solar panels and a small gas unit she'd repaired 100 times. She and the 2 others, Marcus, the old man, and Theo, the young boy, took turns monitoring the radio and recording climate readings. They called it the Climate Recovery Project, though there was little left to recover. But I admired them. Even after everything, they still counted humidity, wind direction, air pressure, as if keeping track of the Earth's breath might somehow help it heal. There was a kind of devotion in that. That night, they shared dinner with me, a thin soup made from dried algae and meltwater. It wasn't good, but it was hot. When I drank it, the warmth spread down my chest like a forgotten memory. Marcus smiled, a cracked grin. Doesn't have to taste good, as long as it's warm. We ate quietly, but it wasn't the suffocating quiet of solitude. This silence had rhythm. The sound of spoons tapping bowls, the soft rustle of coats, the low hum of a generator. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt like death. After dinner, I started writing again. But this time, I didn't just write about temperature or rations. I wrote about their laughter. The way Marcus hummed an old tune when he repaired wires. The way Theo's hands shook when lighting the stove. I realized something. Surviving wasn't about keeping the body alive. It was about keeping the memory of humanity alive. On the 10th day, Aaron showed me something strange. A satellite map, faint and glitching. Several heat signatures flickered near the equator. It could have been wildfires, or maybe settlements. She pointed and whispered, as if afraid to break the thought. See that? The Earth's breathing again. Some places are thawing. Maybe spring has begun somewhere. I watched the little dots blink on the screen, floating like distant lanterns. Maybe the apocalypse was never an ending. Maybe it was just the planet's way of forcing us to stop, to listen, and to learn how to live again. That night, we sat by the fire, listening to the radio, mostly static. But in the gaps, between the hums, the cracks, the fading waves, I could have sworn I heard laughter. Faint, far away, but unmistakably human. Erin smiled faintly. Doesn't matter if it's real, she said, as long as there's a voice. The sentence stayed with me. On the 15th morning, the sky changed. After years of gray, it turned a pale blue. Marcus was the first to run outside, shouting like a child. We followed him, Aaron, Theo, and I, stepping into a light we had almost forgotten. The clouds thinned, and sunlight, real sunlight, fell across the snow. Not bright, but enough to make the ice shimmer silver. The wind still cut sharp, but the air smelled different, damp, alive. The smell of thawing earth. Erin looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. At first, I thought she meant the wind. Then I heard it. Faint, steady, fragile, dripping. The sound of melting ice, drop by drop, like the heartbeat of a planet waking from a long coma. We stood there for a long time, saying nothing, just listening, as if afraid the moment might vanish if we moved. That evening, I opened my notebook and wrote my final entry. Day 219 of the Second Ice Age. Temperature, -12 degrees, clear sky, the first sunlight. I no longer count the days to survive, but to witness the Earth's return. I set down the pen. Across the room, Aaron was sleeping. Theo was on watch, Marcus snoring softly. Outside, the air was still, the world almost tender. From the roof came the slow, rhythmic dripping of melting snow. Small sounds, but enough to keep a soul from breaking. Tomorrow, we'll start south, toward the warm zones. Maybe we'll find others. Maybe we'll plant again. But tonight, I just want to sit quietly and listen to the earth breathe. Because in this moment, I know we have survived, and somehow, so has the world.